Hey y'all. So, a simple but very fundamental question for the purposes of prayer. Can we change the mind of God? Can we? I know this seems like kind of a ludicrous question, but it's a fair it's a fair question to ask. Can we change the mind of God? Because if we can't, then this may be your dream, but if we can't, what's the purpose of prayer? And what's the point of prayer? What's the point of communication with God if God is just going to if God's not going to listen to us? If God's just going to do what He wants, which is perfect, by the way, but still. Well, turn with me to the book of Exodus. Exodus 32, 10 through 14. Again, that's Exodus 32, 10 through 14. A little background here. In the verses in the verses before this, we see that God gave commandments to Moses, the Ten Commandments. Moses was up on the mountain with God, and then God hears a rumbling from below the mountain. The Israelites have made an idol, have made a golden calf to worship and fall before, and talk to and maybe communicate with. But as you can imagine, God is a little more than angry. Picking up in verse 10. Now therefore, let me alone, that my wrath may burn hard against them, and I may consume them, and I will make of you a great nation. Then Moses pleaded with the Lord his God, and said, Lord, why does your wrath burn hard against your people, whom you brought out of the land of Egypt with great power and with a mighty hand? Why do the Egyptians speak and say, He brought them out to harm them, to kill them in the mountains, and to consume them from the face of the earth? Turn from your fierce wrath, and relent from this harm to your people. Remember Abraham, Isaac, and Israel, your servants whom you swore by your own self, and said to them, I will multiply your descendants as the stars of heaven, and all the land that I've spoken of I'll give to your descendants, and they shall inherit it forever. Now, there's a lot to unpack there. First of all, in verse 10, we see God give Moses kind of an ultimatum. I don't know if it's exactly the right word, but I'm going to use it anyway. We see this in verse 10. God basically says, hey, if you let me alone and let my wrath burn hot against these people that I may consume them, I'll make of you a great nation. It will start with you, and I'll make you a great nation. Now, this ultimatum type deal, I have two schools of thought in it. One school of thought is more plausible than the other, but nonetheless, I have two schools of thought on it. One, God has given Moses' ultimatum as sort of a test, as a test of his faith and of his will, seeing whether he's truly for God or ultimately for himself. And the other and more plausible reason is just what it says, just what God said. if Moses is allowed them to consume the Israelites and wipe them off the face of the earth, then God would have started with Moses. You remember, Moses was really the only one who did what God expected of him, who did what God wanted. Moses had been loyal to God. So he's offering him here, hey, these evil people, these corrupted people, I'll wipe them out and I'll start off with you, and I'll start anew with you. What do you say? Verse 11 we pick up at. Then Moses pleaded with the Lord as God said, Lord, why does your wrath burn hard against your people, whom you have brought out of the land of Egypt with a pound with a mighty hand? He questions God a little bit. And notice in all these other verses, he doesn't really seem to be defending the Israelites. Well, any defense is a happy coincidence anyway. He doesn't really seem to be defending the Israelites. He just reminded God, hey, remember your promises, and hey, God, think about also for you. Think about also what the Egyptians would say, that you brought the people whom you wanted out of the land of Egypt to destroy them, to kill them, to wipe them off the face of the earth. We see him. See, that's the difference between our God, Yahweh, as through Jesus Christ, and even before Jesus Christ, and every other ideology and idol out there. We can question God, we can have a conversation with him, we can remind him of stuff, not that he's necessarily forgotten, but we can have a conversation with them. We don't have to be afraid. We don't have to be cowering on our knees, or we don't have to be. We can be bold, and we can be questioning. Now this, important to note here, though Moses kind of talked God off the edge in verse 14, it says, so the Lord relented from the harm which he said he would do to his people. Important to note here, this anger is a righteous anger. Let's be honest, when people talk us out of anger or out of making a decision, it's usually for the best. It's usually misplaced anger. It's usually just not that important, really. But this was a righteous anger. That's why God said he is a jealous God. He didn't do that. He didn't say that as much for himself as he said it for us. As he was laying down the law with us and saying, hey, these idols you people got going on, yeah, don't do that, because I want to show you that I can do more. And if you put your trust in idols or man-made things, then I can't show you what I can do. I can't. That type of righteous jealousy and righteous anger that God had. We think of jealousy, we think of anger, we think of childish things. But coming off of God, righteous jealousy and righteous anger, the only two times is really acceptable. But we see Moses kind of talk God off the edge. And not really defending Israel, but defending him. Now, I doubt that in our time, a conversation like this, where God is threatening to destroy an entire nation, to wipe out an entire nation, I doubt it would happen again. I doubt we'll ever be in that same type of dire situation that Moses was in again. Maybe, but I just doubt it. But this showed us more than anything that we can have a conversation with God. We can tell him what we're feeling. We can maybe challenge isn't the right word, but we could maybe question him a little bit. We could remind him of stuff. We don't have to be nervous, and we don't have to be really subservient. I mean, that same power that Moses had to question God and to... Now, I want to preface this. Don't hear what I'm not saying. I'm not saying you can question God in everything. Because, yes, beyond it in it too, when we question God most of the time, it's for our benefit. But when Moses questioned God, when he had this conversation with him, it was for his benefit. It was for God's benefit, not for Moses. God was actually thinking of benefiting Moses. But Moses turned it down. Moses said, hey, God, I know you're angry right now. I understand. You're righteous anger, I understand. But think of what the people will say about you. Not about the Israelites, not about me, but about you. And I remind you of the promises that you made. Prayer and conversation with God doesn't come back void. I mean, it may not play out exactly the way we want it to play out, but it doesn't come back void. It's kind of a paradoxical thing, thinking we can change the mind of God or that we can remind him of stuff. But if we couldn't, I mean, prayer would pretty much be useless. I mean, I'm convinced I wouldn't be here if not for the power of prayer and for the fervent prayer. That's why Jesus himself said, keep praying, keep knocking, and keep persisting. Because not only can it reveal something to you, but maybe through that act of faith, God will, if it aligned with God's plan, I mean, maybe all God needs is that act of faith, is that fervent prayer, and that fervent asking, that fervent seeking. And we learn through this that God is, I don't want to say malleable, but that God's willing to listen to his people. God's willing to take what they have to say into account. And I thank God for that, because if he wasn't, then prayer would be useless. But through the power of God and through Jesus Christ and through him being a gracious and giving and loving God, then he'll listen to us. No matter what we think our quit is, no matter big or small, he'll listen because he cares. Because at the end of the day, he cares about us. And he cares about what we care about. Not that he wants us to be happy for happiness' sake, but if we're truly in tune with God, as Moses was, we'll have the ideals and ideas of God in mind, not just the ideas of the short term or just ideas that ultimately are going to benefit us, but to benefit God, because he loves us. And he wants us to have abundant life. Pray with shameful, shameless abandon. And as my preacher said yesterday, pray shameless abandon. Because ultimately that's what God wants. God wants us to have conversation with him. God is inviting us to have conversation and communion with him because he wants to know us more. And through that, he wants us to get to know him more. Guys, I love you. God bless you. And I'll see you next week.